It was a sweltering summer afternoon, the kind of day where the air feels heavy and the sun beats down relentlessly. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind where everyone knows each other's business, a man named Marcus was doing what he always did on days like this, enjoying the peace and quiet of his own backyard. Marcus had worked hard for this. The pool, the patio, the perfectly manicured lawn, it was all his, a testament to years of sacrifice and determination. But what should have been a relaxing day by the water turned into something far more dramatic, all because of one woman who couldn't mind her own business. Her name was Karen, and she was about to make a call that would change everything. Karen lived a few houses down from Marcus, and if you asked anyone in the neighborhood about her, they'd probably roll their eyes. She was the type who always had something to say, whether it was about someone's lawn being too long or a car parked slightly too close to her driveway. But this time she went too far. As Marcus was closing up his pool for the evening, Karen decided she didn't like what she saw. Maybe it was the way he looked, tall, confident, and undeniably black, or maybe it was just her own biases bubbling to the surface. Whatever it was, she picked up her phone and dialed 911, claiming there was a suspicious man in the area. What she didn't know was that Marcus wasn't just any man. He was a man with a story, a man who had faced more than his fair share of challenges, and a man who wasn't about to let someone like Karen ruin his day. When the police arrived, the tension in the air was palpable. Marcus stood there, calm but firm, explaining that this was his property, and he had every right to be there. The officers, to their credit, quickly realized what was going on, but just when it seemed like the situation might de-escalate, something unexpected happened. As Marcus was showing the officers his ID, he noticed something strange near the edge of his pool. It was small, almost hidden, but it caught his eye. He bent down to take a closer look, and what he found sent a chill down his spine. It was something he never expected to see, something that would make him question everything he thought he knew about his home, his neighborhood, and even Karen herself. The officers noticed the change in Marcus's demeanor and asked if everything was okay. He hesitated, unsure of how much to say. Should he tell them what he'd found? Should he confront Karen right then and there? Or was there more to this story than met the eye? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows, across the yard, Marcus made a decision, one that would set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. But before he could act, Karen, who had been watching from a distance, decided to insert herself into the situation once again. She marched over, her face flushed with indignation, demanding to know what was going on. Little did she know the tables were about to turn in a way she never could have imagined. What Marcus discovered by the pool that day was more than just a strange object. It was a clue, a piece of a puzzle that would unravel a story far bigger than anyone could have anticipated. And as for Karen, her decision to call 911 would come back to haunt her in ways she never expected. But that's just the beginning. What happened next would test the limits of patience, justice, and humanity itself. So, what did Marcus find by the pool? And how would Karen react when she realized the truth? The answers to those questions are coming up. But one thing's for sure, this story is far from over. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, staring at the small, weathered object he'd found near the edge of his pool. It was a locket, old, tarnished, and slightly dented, as if it had been buried for years. He picked it up carefully, feeling the weight of it in his hand. The chain was broken, and the clasp was stiff, but after a little effort, he managed to open it. Inside was a faded photograph of a young girl, her smile bright and innocent, frozen in time. Marcus's heart sank. He didn't recognize her, but something about the locket felt significant. almost haunting. How had it ended up in his backyard? And why did it feel like it was connected to something much bigger? As Marcus turned the locket over in his hands, Karen's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her tone sharp and accusatory. She had marched over from her yard, her arms crossed and her face twisted into a scowl. The police officers exchanged glances, clearly unsure how to handle her. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He knew Karen had a reputation for stirring up trouble, but this time she had crossed a line. "This is my property," he said firmly, holding up the locket, "and I just found this. Do you know anything about it?" Karen's eyes flicked to the locket, and for a brief moment her expression changed. It was subtle, a flicker of recognition, maybe even fear. But it was enough to make Marcus wonder. She quickly recovered, though, her usual mask of indignation slipping back into place. "Why would I know anything about that?" she snapped. "I called the police because I saw someone suspicious lurking around, that's all." Her words were defensive, but there was something in her tone that didn't sit right with Marcus. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he knew there was more to her story. The officers, sensing the growing tension, tried to defuse the situation. "Ma'am, we've confirmed that this is Mr. Johnson's property," one of them said, gesturing to Marcus. "There's no reason for concern here." But Karen wasn't ready to back down. "Well, what about that?" she said, pointing to the locket. "If he found something on his property, shouldn't you be investigating that? What if it's evidence of something?" Her voice was shrill, and Marcus could tell she was grasping at straws. Still, her words planted a seed of doubt in his mind. What if the locket was connected to something bigger? What if it was evidence of a crime, or worse? Marcus decided to take matters into his own hands. "I'll handle this," he said to the officers, his voice steady but firm. "Thank you for your time." The officers nodded, clearly relieved to be out of the middle of the confrontation. As they walked back to their car, Marcus turned to Karen. "I don't know what your problem is," he said, his tone calm but pointed. "But this is my home, and I'm not going to let you or anyone else make me feel like I don't belong here." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but for once she seemed at a loss for words. She shot him one last glare before turning on her, heel and storming back to her house. Once she was gone, Marcus let out a long breath. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, but his mind was racing. He looked down at the locket again, studying the photograph of the young girl. Who was she? And how had her locket ended up buried in his yard? He knew he needed answers, but he wasn't sure where to start. As he walked back into his house, he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts consumed by the locket and the events of the day. He thought about Karen and the way she'd looked at the locket, that brief moment of recognition. Was it possible she knew something? And if so, why wouldn't she say anything? He also thought about the girl in the photograph. She looked so young, maybe 8 or 9 years old. Had she lived in this neighborhood? Had something happened to her? The questions swirled in his mind, each one more unsettling than the last. The next morning, Marcus decided to do some digging, literally. He grabbed a shovel and headed back to the spot where he'd found the locket. If it had been buried there, maybe there was more to find. He started digging carefully, not sure what he was looking for, but determined to find something. After about an hour, his shovel hit something solid. He dropped to his knees, brushing away the dirt with his hands. What he uncovered made his blood run cold. It was a small rusted metal box, the kind you might use to store keepsakes. His hands trembled as he lifted it out of the ground and opened it. Inside the box were more photographs, all of the same young girl. There were also a few handwritten notes, their ink faded and barely legible. Marcus's heart pounded as he read. The words on one of the notes: If you're reading this, something has happened to me. Please find my daughter. Her name is Emily. The note was signed with a name Marcus didn't recognize, but the date at the bottom made his stomach churn. It was from over 20 years ago.